Question 1. To address the challenge of assessing an applicant's suitability for a shotgun certificate in England, where the applicant has declared past domestic disputes but no criminal convictions, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Refuse the shotgun certificate outright based on the reported domestic disputes, as such incidents inherently indicate a risk to public safety. Option B. Issue the shotgun certificate immediately, as the applicant has no criminal convictions, which is the primary criterion for eligibility. Option C. Rely solely on the applicant's references to confirm their good character, without conducting an interview or seeking further information. Option D. Conduct a detailed interview with the applicant, thoroughly review the references provided, and seek any relevant police intelligence regarding the domestic disputes to form a comprehensive assessment of suitability and public safety. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed interview with the applicant, thoroughly review the references provided, and seek any relevant police intelligence regarding the domestic disputes to form a comprehensive assessment of suitability and public safety. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a shotgun certificate with the legal obligation to ensure public safety and prevent the misuse of firearms. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in a criminal conviction, raises concerns about their temperament and suitability to possess a firearm, necessitating a thorough and objective assessment. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all provided documentation, including the applicant's references and any relevant police intelligence, coupled with a direct, probing interview. This approach is correct because it aligns with the requirements of the Firearms Act 1968, as amended, and associated Home Office guidance, which mandate that the police must be satisfied that an applicant has a good reason to possess a firearm and that they are not a danger to public safety. The interview allows for clarification of any ambiguities in the application and provides an opportunity to assess the applicant's demeanor and understanding of their responsibilities. The references are crucial for corroborating the applicant's character and suitability. An incorrect approach would be to grant the certificate solely based on the absence of a criminal conviction. This fails to acknowledge that the Firearms Act requires more than just a clean criminal record. It demands a positive assessment of suitability and a lack of any known risk. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse the certificate based solely on the reported domestic disputes without further investigation or interview. While domestic issues are a serious concern, a refusal must be based on objective evidence demonstrating a risk to public safety, not mere allegations or past incidents that did not lead to formal charges. Finally, relying exclusively on the applicant's references without independent verification or a personal interview would be insufficient, as references may be biased or lack full awareness of the applicant's character. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the legal framework. This involves meticulously reviewing all submitted evidence, identifying potential red flags or areas requiring further clarification, and then conducting a targeted interview to address these concerns directly. The decision should be based on a holistic assessment of the applicant's suitability, considering all available information, and adhering to the principle of ensuring public safety above all else. Question 2. The review process indicates that Mr. Arthur Pendleton, a shotgun certificate holder in the United Kingdom, has recently been convicted of a minor public order offense. What is the most appropriate course of action for the police licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a thorough, individualized risk assessment considering the nature of the offense, Mr. Pendleton's history, and relevant Home Office guidance to determine if he poses a danger to the public or the peace. Option B. Rely solely on the recommendation of the local firearms officer without further investigation or consultation of legal guidance. Option C. Immediately revoke Mr. Pendleton's shotgun certificate due to the conviction for a public order offense, as this demonstrates a lack of suitability. Option D. Ignore the conviction, assuming that a minor public order offense has no bearing on firearms licensing suitability. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough, individualized risk assessment considering the nature of the offense, Mr. Pendleton's history, and relevant Home Office guidance to determine if he poses a danger to the public or the peace. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential issue with a shotgun certificate (SGC) holder in the United Kingdom, Mr. Arthur Pendleton, who has recently been convicted of a minor public order offense. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a careful balancing act between public safety, the rights of the certificate holder, and the strict requirements of firearms licensing legislation in the UK. The police, as the licensing authority, must assess whether Mr. Pendleton poses a risk to public safety, even with a conviction for a relatively minor offense. This requires a nuanced judgment, moving beyond a simple tick-box exercise. The best approach involves a thorough, individualized risk assessment by the police. This assessment should consider the nature and circumstances of the public order offense, the time elapsed since the conviction, Mr. Pendleton's overall character and history, and any other relevant information that might indicate a propensity for violence or misuse of firearms. The police must also consider the specific provisions of the Firearms Act 1968, as amended, and relevant Home Office guidance, which stipulate that a certificate must be revoked if the holder is convicted of an offense that makes them a danger to the public or to the peace. A conviction for a public order offense, while not automatically disqualifying, necessitates a careful evaluation of whether it demonstrates such a danger. This approach aligns with the principle of proportionality and ensures that decisions are evidence-based and legally sound, upholding the integrity of the SGC system. An incorrect approach would be to automatically revoke the SGC solely based on the conviction for a public order offense, without conducting any further assessment. This fails to consider the nuances of the offense and the individual circumstances, potentially leading to an unjust revocation and a failure to adhere to the requirement for a reasoned assessment of public danger. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the conviction entirely, assuming that because it was a minor offense, it has no bearing on firearms licensing. This would be a dereliction of duty by the police, as they are legally obligated to consider all convictions when assessing suitability for a firearms certificate, and to revoke it if the holder is deemed a danger. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the opinion of the local firearms officer without consulting relevant Home Office guidance, or considering the full scope of the Firearms Act 1968. This could lead to inconsistent decision-making and a failure to apply the law uniformly. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes a comprehensive, evidence-based risk assessment. This involves gathering all relevant information, applying the relevant legal framework, in this case, the Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance, and making a reasoned judgment about public safety. If there is any doubt, it is better to err on the side of caution and conduct a more thorough investigation. The process should be transparent and the decision communicated clearly to the applicant, with information on their right to appeal. Question 3. Examination of the data shows that a resident of Surrey has applied for a shotgun certificate, SGC. The application form is complete, and the applicant has no criminal convictions. However, the local police have received 2 separate reports over the past 3 years detailing domestic disputes involving the applicant, neither of which resulted in formal charges or arrests. The applicant states these were minor disagreements that have been resolved. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Grant the shotgun certificate as the applicant has no criminal convictions and has provided assurances that the disputes were minor. Option B. Issue a warning to the applicant regarding domestic disputes and grant the shotgun certificate, assuming the issue is resolved. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the reported domestic disputes, gathering further information from relevant parties and police records, and assess whether the applicant poses a risk to public safety before making a decision. Option D. Refuse the shotgun certificate immediately due to the reports of domestic disputes, as this indicates a potential risk. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the reported domestic disputes, gathering further information from relevant parties and police records, and assess whether the applicant poses a risk to public safety before making a decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms licensing and the potential for public safety risks. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in formal charges, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability to possess a shotgun, as stipulated by the Firearms Act 1968. The licensing authority has a duty to ensure that firearms are only issued to individuals who can be trusted with them, and a history of domestic violence, regardless of conviction, can indicate a propensity for violence or instability. Careful judgment is required to balance the applicant's right to apply for a certificate with the paramount need for public safety. The best approach involves a thorough investigation into the applicant's background, specifically focusing on the reported domestic disputes. This includes contacting the individuals involved in the disputes, if possible and appropriate, and reviewing any available police records or witness statements. The licensing authority must then assess whether the information gathered indicates that the applicant is a person who poses a risk to public safety or the safety of others. If the investigation reveals credible evidence of behavior that suggests a risk, the application should be refused under Section 28 of the Firearms Act 1968, which prohibits the grant of a shotgun certificate to individuals who are a danger to the public. This approach prioritizes public safety and adheres to the licensing authority's statutory obligations. An incorrect approach would be to grant the certificate solely based on the absence of a criminal conviction. This fails to acknowledge that the Firearms Act 1968 requires the licensing authority to be satisfied that the applicant is a fit and proper person, which extends beyond mere criminal record checks. Ignoring credible reports of domestic disputes, even without formal charges, is a failure to exercise due diligence and could lead to a dangerous individual possessing a firearm. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse the application immediately without any further investigation. While caution is warranted, a refusal must be based on a reasoned assessment of the evidence. A blanket refusal without attempting to gather more information would be procedurally unfair to the applicant and could be challenged. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's assurances that the disputes were minor or resolved. While the applicant's statement is part of the information to be considered, it cannot be the sole basis for a decision, especially when there are credible reports to the contrary. The licensing authority must independently verify information where possible. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the statutory requirements and the licensing authority's duty of care. This involves a proactive approach to information gathering, a balanced assessment of all available evidence, and a clear, documented rationale for any decision made, always prioritizing public safety. Question 4. Upon reviewing an application for a shotgun certificate in England, an applicant who has a prior conviction for theft and has also received a police caution for public intoxication in the past, is considering how to present this information to the police firearms licensing department. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to take regarding the disclosure of these past incidents? Option A. State that no issues have arisen since the conviction for theft, implying that past cautions are no longer relevant to their current suitability. Option B. Only disclose the conviction for theft, as police cautions are generally considered less serious and may not be relevant after a significant period has passed. Option C. Fully disclose both the conviction for theft and the police caution for public intoxication to the police firearms licensing department, providing brief details of each incident. Option D. Wait for the police firearms licensing department to discover the police caution during their background checks before disclosing it. The correct answer is C. Fully disclose both the conviction for theft and the police caution for public intoxication to the police firearms licensing department, providing brief details of each incident. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only responsible ownership of firearms, but also a clear understanding of the legal framework governing their possession. The core difficulty lies in accurately and comprehensively disclosing all relevant information to the licensing authority, as omissions or misrepresentations can have serious consequences. The licensing authority's duty is to ensure public safety, and therefore, they must be satisfied that the applicant is a fit and proper person to hold a shotgun certificate. This necessitates a thorough and honest disclosure of any past issues that might raise concerns about an individual's suitability. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a complete and transparent disclosure of all relevant information to the police firearms licensing department. This includes any past cautions, convictions, or findings of guilt, regardless of how minor they may seem or how long ago they occurred. The Firearms Act 1968, as amended, and associated Home Office guidance place a strong emphasis on an applicant's character and history. Specifically, Section 21 of the Act prohibits the possession of shotguns by individuals who have been sentenced to imprisonment for certain offenses. While a caution is not a conviction, It is a formal disciplinary action that the police will consider when assessing suitability. Full disclosure allows the licensing authority to make an informed decision based on all available facts, adhering to the principle of public safety and the spirit of the licensing regime. This approach demonstrates honesty and a commitment to complying with the law, which are fundamental requirements for obtaining and retaining a shotgun certificate in the United Kingdom. Incorrect approaches analysis, providing only details of convictions and omitting any cautions, is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes a failure to disclose relevant information. While a caution is not a conviction, it is a record of misconduct that the police are entitled to know about when assessing an applicant's suitability to possess firearms. Omitting it can be seen as an attempt to mislead the licensing authority, which could lead to the refusal of the application or revocation of a certificate if discovered later. This breaches the ethical duty of honesty and the legal requirement for full disclosure, stating that no issues have arisen since the conviction and therefore past cautions are irrelevant is also professionally unacceptable. The licensing authority's assessment is based on the totality of an applicant's history, not just recent behavior. Past incidents, even if seemingly resolved, can provide insight into an individual's character and judgment. The law requires disclosure of all relevant past events, and the applicant cannot unilaterally decide what is or is not relevant. This approach demonstrates a misunderstanding of the comprehensive nature of the licensing assessment. Waiting for the police to discover the caution through background checks before disclosing it is professionally unacceptable. This passive approach undermines the principle of proactive and honest disclosure. The onus is on the applicant to provide all necessary information upfront. Relying on the authorities to uncover information suggests a lack of diligence and transparency, which is contrary to the expectations placed upon firearms certificate holders. It also risks the application being viewed with suspicion from the outset. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with firearms licensing applications should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. The decision-making framework should prioritize full and honest disclosure of all information requested, and any information that might be relevant to an applicant's suitability, even if not explicitly asked for. This involves understanding the legal requirements of the Firearms Act 1968 and the associated Home Office guidance, which emphasize the applicant's character and history. When in doubt about what to disclose, it is always best to err on the side of caution and provide the information. This builds trust with the licensing authority and ensures compliance with the law, ultimately safeguarding public safety. Question 5. When evaluating an application for a shotgun certificate in the United Kingdom, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority when an applicant states their reason for wanting a shotgun is to learn to shoot and participate in recreational target practice? Option A. Focus on the applicant's employment history and financial stability to determine their overall responsibility before considering the stated reason for the shotgun. Option B. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the stated reason clearly falls within the scope of lawful recreational activities. Option C. Request further details from the applicant regarding specific shooting clubs, disciplines they intend to participate in, and evidence of membership or booking at a suitable range, while also assessing their suitability to hold a firearm. Option D. Refuse the application outright due to the vagueness of the stated reason, advising the applicant to reapply once they have concrete plans. The correct answer is C. Request further details from the applicant regarding specific shooting clubs, disciplines they intend to participate in, and evidence of membership or booking at a suitable range, while also assessing their suitability to hold a firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a shotgun with the legal requirements for obtaining a shotgun certificate, SGC, in the United Kingdom. The core of the challenge lies in assessing the genuine and lawful reason for possessing a firearm, particularly when the applicant's initial explanation might be vague or potentially raise concerns about suitability. A thorough and objective evaluation is paramount to uphold public safety and the integrity of the firearms licensing system. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive and objective assessment of the applicant's stated reason for needing a shotgun, cross-referencing it with the requirements of the Firearms Act 1968 as amended and relevant Home Office guidance. This includes verifying the legitimacy of the proposed use, e.g., membership in a shooting club, game shooting, pest control, and ensuring it aligns with lawful activities. The applicant must demonstrate a genuine and lawful reason, and the licensing authority has a duty to be satisfied on this point. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the statutory requirement for a good reason to possess a shotgun, ensuring that the applicant meets the legal threshold for obtaining an SGC. It prioritizes a fact-based inquiry, avoiding assumptions or premature judgments. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the SGC based solely on the applicant's assertion of wanting to try shooting, without further investigation into the specifics of their intended activities. This fails to meet the good reason requirement, as it relies on a vague desire rather than a concrete, lawful purpose. It risks issuing a certificate for a reason that may not be legitimate or safe. Another incorrect approach is to immediately refuse the application based on a perceived lack of detail in the initial request, without giving the applicant an opportunity to provide further clarification or evidence. A caution is necessary. An outright refusal without due diligence can be procedurally unfair and may overlook a legitimate reason that simply requires further explanation. The process should allow for reasonable inquiry. A further incorrect approach is to focus excessively on the applicant's personal circumstances unrelated to their suitability to possess a shotgun, such as their employment status or financial situation, unless these directly impact their ability to store the firearm safely or pose a risk to public safety. The primary focus must remain on the lawful reason for possession and the applicant's suitability as defined by firearms legislation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the legal framework. This involves clearly identifying the statutory requirements for an SGC, particularly the good reason criterion. Subsequently, they must engage in a thorough and objective fact-finding process, seeking to verify the applicant's stated reason through appropriate channels. This includes asking clarifying questions, requesting supporting documentation, and, if necessary, conducting interviews. The decision should be based on the evidence gathered and its alignment with legal requirements, always prioritizing public safety. If the good reason is not demonstrably met, or if concerns about suitability arise, the application should be refused with clear reasons provided to the applicant. Question 6. The analysis reveals that a shotgun certificate holder in Scotland, who has previously been diagnosed with a significant mental health condition, has recently informed the issuing police force that their living situation has changed due to a relationship breakdown, and they are experiencing increased stress. The police are aware of the previous mental health diagnosis. What is the most appropriate course of action for the police to take regarding the shotgun certificate? Option A. Place the shotgun certificate on hold for 6 months, pending a further informal update from the applicant on their well-being. Option B. Accept the applicant's assurance that they are managing their stress and will not pose a risk, and take no further action on the certificate at this time. Option C. Initiate a full review of the shotgun certificate, requesting updated medical information from the applicant and consulting with their GP and the police's own medical advisor to assess their current suitability and any potential risk to public safety. Option D. Immediately revoke the shotgun certificate due to the applicant's history of mental health issues and the current stressful circumstances, without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Initiate a full review of the shotgun certificate, requesting updated medical information from the applicant and consulting with their GP and the police's own medical advisor to assess their current suitability and any potential risk to public safety. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a shotgun certificate holder's circumstances have changed, necessitating a review of their suitability to possess firearms. The professional challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to possess firearms for legitimate purposes with the paramount public safety duty imposed by the Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance. A thorough, objective assessment is crucial, avoiding assumptions or undue influence. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the applicant's updated circumstances, including obtaining and scrutinizing all relevant information from the applicant and the police. This aligns with the Home Office's firearms law, guidance to the police which mandates that police must be satisfied that an applicant is a fit and proper person, and that granting a certificate would not create a risk to public safety. This includes considering any new medical information, changes in living arrangements, or any other factors that might impact suitability. The police have a statutory duty to review certificates when circumstances change, and must act if they have reason to believe the holder is no longer a fit and proper person. An incorrect approach would be to automatically revoke the certificate based solely on the applicant's admission of a past mental health episode without a current assessment of risk. This fails to consider the individual's current state and the guidance which emphasizes that a history of mental illness does not automatically disqualify an individual if it can be demonstrated that they are no longer a risk. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's assurance that they are now well, without independent verification or police consultation. This bypasses the statutory requirement for the police to be satisfied of the applicant's suitability. Finally, delaying the review process indefinitely, hoping the issue will resolve itself, is also professionally unacceptable as it fails to uphold the duty of care to public safety and disregards the statutory obligation to review certificates when circumstances change. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, identify the trigger for review, e.g., change in circumstances. Second, gather all relevant information objectively from all parties, including the applicant and the police. Third, assess the information against the legal criteria of being a fit and proper person and ensuring public safety, considering current risk factors. Fourth, consult relevant guidance and, if necessary, seek legal advice. Finally, make a decision based on the evidence and legal requirements, communicating it clearly to the applicant. Question 7. Comparative studies suggest that when assessing an applicant for a shotgun certificate in the United Kingdom, the Firearms Licensing Authority, FLA, faces complex decisions. If an applicant discloses a history of domestic disputes, even if these did not result in criminal convictions, what is the most professionally responsible course of action for the FLA? Option A. Grant the shotgun certificate without further inquiry, assuming that the absence of criminal convictions signifies suitability. Option B. Rely solely on the applicant's written assurances that the disputes were minor and do not pose a risk, without seeking any external verification. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, seeking further information to assess the applicant's suitability and potential risk to public safety. Option D. Automatically refuse the application, citing the mention of domestic disputes as an immediate disqualifying factor. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, seeking further information to assess the applicant's suitability and potential risk to public safety. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intention for firearm ownership with the legal requirements and public safety considerations mandated by the UK's shotgun certificate legislation. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal convictions, raises concerns about their suitability to possess a firearm, necessitating a thorough and objective assessment by the Firearms Licensing Authority, FLA. The FLA must act impartially, adhering strictly to the law, while also exercising due diligence to protect the public. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of all available information, including the applicant's application, any relevant police intelligence, and direct communication with the applicant and potentially other relevant parties. This approach prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based decision. Specifically, the FLA should investigate the nature and severity of the domestic disputes, seeking to understand if they indicate a propensity for violence or a lack of control that would make the applicant a risk. This aligns with the Firearms Act 1968, which requires the police, acting as the FLA, to be satisfied that a person can be permitted to have a shotgun without danger to the public safety or to the peace. This involves a proactive and investigative stance, rather than passively accepting the application or making assumptions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to automatically refuse the application solely based on the mention of domestic disputes without further investigation. This fails to adhere to the principle of fairness and due process, as the applicant has a right to have their application considered on its merits. Law does not mandate automatic refusal for any mention of past disputes, but rather requires the FLA to be satisfied of the applicant's suitability. Another incorrect approach is to grant the certificate without any further inquiry, assuming that the absence of criminal convictions means the applicant is suitable. This is a failure of due diligence. The FLA has a duty to consider all relevant information that might indicate a risk, and past domestic disputes, even without conviction, can be highly relevant to assessing suitability and potential danger. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on the applicant's assurances that the disputes were minor and have no bearing on their current suitability, without seeking independent verification or further information. While the applicant's statement is part of the evidence, it should not be the sole basis for a decision, especially when concerning public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearms licensing must adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the legal framework, Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance. 2. Thoroughly reviewing the application and all supporting documentation. 3. Proactively seeking and evaluating all relevant information, including police intelligence and potentially interviewing the applicant or other individuals. 4. Applying objective criteria to assess risk to public safety. 5. Documenting the decision-making process meticulously. This ensures decisions are lawful, fair, and defensible. Question 8. The investigation demonstrates that a firearms licensing authority in England has received an application for a shotgun certificate, SGC, from an individual. Police intelligence has been received indicating that the applicant has been involved in several domestic disputes over the past 2 years, although no arrests or criminal charges have been brought in relation to these incidents. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firearms licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the police intelligence regarding the domestic disputes, assess the potential risk to public safety, and if deemed necessary, request further information from the applicant or refuse the application with a clear explanation. Option B. Refuse the shotgun certificate outright based solely on the report of domestic disputes, without further investigation or providing the applicant with an opportunity to respond. Option C. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the applicant has no criminal convictions and therefore is presumed suitable. Option D. Dismiss the police intelligence concerning the domestic disputes as irrelevant, since no criminal charges were filed. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the police intelligence regarding the domestic disputes, assess the potential risk to public safety, and if deemed necessary, request further information from the applicant or refuse the application with a clear explanation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms licensing and the potential for public safety risks. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal charges, raises significant concerns about their suitability to possess a shotgun. The responsible handling of such information requires a thorough and objective assessment, balancing the applicant's rights with the paramount duty to protect the public. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all available information, including the police intelligence regarding the domestic disputes, and a careful assessment of whether the applicant poses a risk. This approach aligns with the core principles of the Firearms Act 1968, as amended, and associated Home Office guidance, which mandate that a shotgun certificate shall not be granted if the applicant is likely to pose a danger to the public. The police have a duty to investigate any information that suggests such a risk, and a refusal based on a well-reasoned assessment of this intelligence, even without a conviction, is professionally sound and legally justifiable. The decision must be based on the likelihood of future harm, not solely on past convictions. An approach that dismisses the police intelligence solely because no criminal charges were brought is professionally unacceptable. While a lack of conviction is a factor, it does not automatically negate the potential for risk. The police have a duty to gather and assess intelligence relevant to public safety, and ignoring this information would be a failure to exercise due diligence. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to grant the certificate without further investigation, assuming the applicant is suitable simply because they have no criminal record. This demonstrates a lack of proactive risk assessment and a failure to uphold the public safety mandate inherent in firearms licensing. The absence of a conviction does not equate to the absence of risk. Finally, an approach that immediately refuses the certificate based solely on the report of domestic disputes, without allowing the applicant an opportunity to respond or providing a detailed explanation for the refusal, could be challenged. While the police have a duty to assess risk, the process should be fair and transparent, allowing for due process where appropriate, provided it does not compromise immediate public safety. However, in this specific scenario, the primary concern is the thoroughness of the risk assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough, objective, and evidence-based risk assessment. This involves gathering all relevant information, considering the potential impact on public safety, consulting relevant guidance and legislation, and documenting the decision-making process meticulously. Where concerns are raised, further investigation and engagement with the applicant may be necessary, but the ultimate decision must be grounded in a clear assessment of risk. Question 9. Analysis of a situation in the United Kingdom where an individual has applied for a shotgun certificate, stating a genuine reason for possession related to pest control on their rural property. During the application process, the police receive an anonymous tip from a neighbor expressing vague concerns about the applicant's erratic behavior and loud noises at night, without specifying any direct threat or illegal activity. What is the most appropriate course of action for the police to take in assessing this application? Option A. Refuse the shotgun certificate application outright due to the neighbor's concerns, as any doubt raised by a third party warrants a precautionary refusal. Option B. Immediately dismiss the neighbor's concerns as unsubstantiated hearsay from an anonymous source and proceed with the application based solely on the applicant's stated reason. Option C. Contact the neighbor to understand the specific nature of their concerns and their basis, while also informing the applicant of the general nature of the concerns raised and providing them with an opportunity to respond and submit further evidence. Option D. Rely solely on the applicant's initial statement of a genuine reason for pest control and disregard the neighbor's tip as irrelevant to the applicant's stated purpose. The correct answer is C. Contact the neighbor to understand the specific nature of their concerns and their basis, while also informing the applicant of the general nature of the concerns raised and providing them with an opportunity to respond and submit further evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves balancing the applicant's stated need for a shotgun with potential concerns raised by a third party. The Firearms Amendment. No. 2. Act 1997 and Associated Home Office guidance place a significant onus on the Chief Officer of Police to be satisfied that an applicant has a genuine reason for possessing a firearm and is not a danger to public safety. The involvement of a neighbor's concern, even if seemingly minor or based on hearsay, necessitates a thorough and objective investigation to uphold these principles. Failure to do so could compromise public safety or unfairly penalize an applicant. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a balanced and thorough investigation that directly addresses the neighbor's concerns while respecting the applicant's rights. This approach requires the police to contact the neighbor to ascertain the specific nature and basis of their concerns and to document this information objectively. Simultaneously, the police must engage with the applicant, informing them of the nature of the concerns raised, without necessarily revealing the informant's identity, depending on the circumstances and guidance, and providing an opportunity for them to respond and provide further evidence of their genuine reason for needing the shotgun certificate and their suitability. This ensures that all relevant information is gathered, assessed fairly, and that the decision is based on a comprehensive understanding of the facts, aligning with the statutory requirement for the chief officer to be satisfied. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the neighbor's concerns outright without any further investigation, simply because they are from a neighbor and not a direct threat. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even seemingly minor concerns to indicate underlying issues that could impact public safety or the applicant's suitability, bypasses the duty to make reasonable inquiries, and could lead to a flawed decision. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately refuse the application based solely on the neighbor's unsubstantiated concerns, without giving the applicant an opportunity to respond or provide their perspective. This is procedurally unfair and does not adhere to the principles of natural justice. The applicant has a right to be informed of adverse information and to challenge it. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's initial statement of a genuine reason, such as pest control, without independently verifying or investigating the neighbor's concerns, even if those concerns appear to be about the applicant's behavior rather than the stated reason itself. The police have a duty to be satisfied, which implies a proactive and investigative stance, not passive acceptance of information. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must adopt a systematic and objective decision-making process. This begins with understanding the legal framework and the onus placed upon the licensing authority. The next step is to gather all relevant information, which includes the applicant's submission, any third-party information, and the results of any necessary inquiries. Crucially, this information must be assessed impartially, considering both the applicant's stated needs and any potential risks. The applicant must be afforded procedural fairness, including the right to know and respond to adverse information. The final decision must be demonstrably based on the evidence gathered and the statutory requirements, ensuring public safety and upholding the integrity of the licensing system. Question 10. Consider a scenario where a shotgun certificate SGC was issued in England on 15 March 2019. If the current date is 15 March 2024, and the statutory renewal period for an SGC is 5 years from the date of issue, what is the precise number of full years the certificate has been valid as of today? And what is the date by which a renewal application should ideally be submitted to ensure continuous lawful possession? Option A. The certificate has been valid for 4 full years as of today, 15 March 2024. A renewal application should ideally be submitted by 15 March 2023 to ensure continuous lawful possession. Option B. The certificate has been valid for exactly 5 full years as of today, 15 March 2024. A renewal application should ideally be submitted by 15 September 2024 to ensure continuous lawful possession. Option C. The certificate has been valid for 5 full years as of today, 15 March 2024. A renewal application should ideally be submitted by 15 March 2025 to ensure continuous lawful possession. Option D. The certificate has been valid for exactly 5 full years as of today, 15 March 2024. A renewal application should ideally be submitted by 15 March 2024 to ensure continuous lawful possession. The correct answer is D. The certificate has been valid for exactly 5 full years as of today, 15 March 2024. A renewal application should ideally be submitted by 15 March 2024 to ensure continuous lawful possession. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to accurately calculate the remaining validity period of a shotgun certificate, SGC, based on a specific purchase date and a statutory renewal period. Miscalculation could lead to a firearm being held unlawfully, which has serious legal consequences for the holder and potential professional repercussions for the person providing advice. The requirement for precise mathematical application within a legal framework necessitates careful attention to detail and understanding of the relevant legislation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the exact number of years the SGC has been valid from the date of purchase, and then determining the renewal date by adding the statutory renewal period to the original purchase date. This approach ensures compliance with the Firearms Act 1968, which mandates that SGCs are valid for 5 years from the date of issue. By calculating the elapsed time and projecting the renewal date based on the original issue, one can accurately determine the certificate's current status and when it requires renewal. This method is mathematically sound and directly adheres to the legal requirements for SGC validity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply add 5 years to the current date, irrespective of the original purchase date. This fails to account for the specific issuance date of the certificate and could lead to an inaccurate assessment of its validity. Law specifies a 5-year validity from the date of issue, not from an arbitrary current date. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate the remaining validity based on the current date minus the purchase date, and then round this figure up to the nearest whole year for renewal. This introduces an arbitrary rounding element that is not supported by the Firearms Act 1968. The Act requires a clear 5-year validity period, and any deviation without a statutory basis is a regulatory failure. A further incorrect approach would be to assume the certificate is valid for a full 5 years from the current date if the purchase date was more than 5 years ago. This overlooks the fact that the certificate expires 5 years from its original issue date, and a new application would have been required at that point. It does not account for the continuous validity requirement. Professional reasoning. Professionals advising on SGC matters must adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the core legal requirement, the 5-year validity period from the date of issue. Second, perform precise date arithmetic to determine the exact expiry date. Third, compare the expiry date with the current date to ascertain the certificate status. If advising on renewal, calculate the time remaining until expiry and the date by which a renewal application should be submitted to avoid a lapse in lawful possession. This methodical, legally grounded calculation ensures accurate advice and upholds regulatory compliance. Question 11. During the evaluation of a shotgun certificate application in the United Kingdom, an applicant has declared a history of domestic disputes with a former partner, although no criminal charges were ever filed. The applicant states these were minor disagreements and that they have since resolved their issues. The police report notes the disputes but also confirms no formal action was taken. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Firearms Licensing Authority? Option A. Request comprehensive medical records from the applicant's general practitioner, including details of any past mental health consultations, to determine their overall psychological stability. Option B. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the absence of criminal charges means there is no legal basis to refuse the application. Option C. Automatically refuse the application based on the mention of domestic disputes, as any history of such incidents indicates a lack of suitability for firearm possession. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, seeking further information from both the applicant and the police to assess the applicant's suitability and potential risk to public safety. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, seeking further information from both the applicant and the police to assess the applicant's suitability and potential risk to public safety. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Firearms Licensing Authority to balance the public safety imperative with the applicant's right to possess firearms. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal charges, raises concerns about their suitability to hold a shotgun certificate, as it indicates potential issues with temper, judgment, and the responsible handling of firearms. The authority must conduct a thorough and objective assessment, considering all available information without prejudice, while adhering strictly to the legal framework governing shotgun certificates in the United Kingdom. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of all provided information, including the applicant's self-declaration and any supplementary reports from the police. This approach prioritizes gathering all relevant facts to make an informed decision. Specifically, it requires the authority to investigate the nature and severity of the domestic disputes, seeking clarification from the applicant and potentially the police. Firearms Act 1968, as amended, and Associated Home Office guidance place a duty on the licensing authority to be satisfied that an applicant can be permitted to have a shotgun without danger to the public safety or to the peace. This includes considering any history that might suggest a propensity for violence or irresponsibility. A thorough investigation ensures that the decision is based on a complete understanding of the risks, aligning with the core principle of public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to automatically refuse the application solely based on the mention of domestic disputes without further investigation. This fails to uphold the principle of fairness and due process, as it presumes guilt or unsuitability without a proper assessment of the facts. The law requires consideration of evidence, not mere allegations or unproven incidents, in determining suitability. Another incorrect approach is to grant the certificate without any further inquiry, relying solely on the applicant's assertion that no charges were brought. This neglects the licensing authority's duty to proactively assess risk. The absence of criminal charges does not automatically equate to suitability. The authority must still be satisfied that the applicant poses no danger. A further incorrect approach is to request extensive, intrusive personal medical records unrelated to the specific concerns raised by the domestic disputes. While mental health can be a factor, the investigation must be proportionate and targeted to the identified risks. Unnecessary requests for sensitive information can be an overreach and may not directly address the core issue of suitability related to the applicant's conduct. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. understanding the legal framework and guidance thoroughly. 2. Objectively gathering all relevant information, including applicant declarations and police intelligence. 3. Conducting targeted inquiries to clarify any ambiguities or concerns. 4. Applying a risk-based assessment to determine if the applicant meets the statutory requirements for public safety. 5. Documenting the decision-making process meticulously, justifying the outcome based on the evidence and legal provisions. Question 12. Research into an application for a shotgun certificate (SGC) in the United Kingdom reveals that the applicant has stated a need for the firearm for sporting purposes, but has provided no further details. The applicant's background check indicates a record of 2 minor public order offenses from 5 years ago. What is the most appropriate course of action for the police firearms licensing department? Option A. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the applicant has stated a need for sporting purposes, and the offenses are minor and several years old. Option B. Contact the applicant to request specific details regarding their intended use of the shotgun, including the type of shooting, location, and any club affiliations, while simultaneously conducting a thorough review of the nature and relevance of the past public order offenses to firearms possession. Option C. Refuse the shotgun certificate outright due to the presence of any public order offenses on the applicant's record, regardless of their nature or recency. Option D. Grant the shotgun certificate, but impose a condition restricting the shotgun's use to a specific, unverified shooting ground without further inquiry. Correct answer is B. Contact the applicant to request specific details regarding their intended use of the shotgun, including the type of shooting, location, and any club affiliations, while simultaneously conducting a thorough review of the nature and relevance of the past public order offenses to firearms possession. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the applicant's stated need for a shotgun with the legal requirements for obtaining a shotgun certificate (SGC) in the United Kingdom. The core challenge lies in assessing the genuine need and ensuring that the applicant's circumstances do not present a risk to public safety, as mandated by UK firearms law. The police have a duty to satisfy themselves that the applicant is a fit and proper person, and that there is no reason to believe they will use the shotgun in a manner dangerous to the public. The applicant's vague explanation for needing the shotgun, coupled with a history of minor public order offenses, raises red flags that require careful investigation and judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented investigation into the applicant's stated need and background. This includes directly contacting the applicant to seek clarification on their intended use of the shotgun, specifically asking for details about the type of shooting they intend to undertake, the location, and any associated clubs or land. Simultaneously, the police must conduct a comprehensive background check, paying particular attention to the nature and recency of the applicant's public order offenses. The decision to grant or refuse the SGC must be based on a balanced assessment of the information gathered, with a clear justification recorded in writing. Adhering to the principles of the Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance, this approach ensures that all legal requirements are met, public safety is paramount, and the decision is fair and defensible. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to grant the SGC based solely on the applicant's assertion of needing it for sporting purposes, without seeking further details or investigating the public order offenses. This fails to satisfy the police's duty to be satisfied that the applicant is a fit and proper person, and that there is no reason to believe they will misuse the firearm. The vague justification for need is insufficient, and ignoring the criminal record is a significant regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach would be to automatically refuse the SGC based on the public order offenses without a proper assessment of their relevance to firearms possession. While past offenses are a factor, the police must consider the nature, seriousness, and recency of the offenses, and whether they indicate a propensity for violence or irresponsibility that would make the applicant a risk. A blanket refusal without this nuanced assessment is an oversimplification and potentially unlawful. A third incorrect approach would be to grant the SGC but impose overly restrictive conditions without clear justification. For example, restricting the shotgun to a specific, unverified location without a thorough understanding of the applicant's actual shooting plans would be arbitrary and could lead to future complications. Conditions must be reasonable and directly related to mitigating identified risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such a scenario should follow a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core legal requirements. The applicant must demonstrate a genuine need for the shotgun and be deemed a fit and proper person. Second, gather all relevant information, which includes the application details, applicant interviews, background checks, and any references. Third, critically assess the gathered information against the legal criteria, considering any potential risks or concerns. Fourth, document the entire process and the rationale for the final decision, ensuring it is clear, objective, and legally sound. If there are doubts or ambiguities, further investigation or clarification is always the professional course of action. Question 13. Governance review demonstrates that a police force in England is processing a shotgun certificate, SGC, application for an individual who has recently been involved in several reported domestic disputes. While no criminal charges have been filed against the applicant in relation to these incidents, the reporting officer believes these disputes raise questions about the applicant's suitability to possess a shotgun. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing officer to ensure compliance with the Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance? Option A. Immediately contact the local police force to inquire about the nature and severity of the reported domestic disputes and any information they may hold regarding the applicant's suitability. Option B. Proceed with the application, noting the domestic disputes on file, as no criminal convictions exist to disqualify the applicant. Option C. File the information regarding the domestic disputes without further investigation, as the absence of criminal charges means it is not a licensing concern. Option D. Contact the applicant directly to ask for their explanation of the domestic disputes before consulting any external agencies. The correct answer is A. Immediately contact the local police force to inquire about the nature and severity of the reported domestic disputes and any information they may hold regarding the applicant's suitability. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms licensing and the potential for public safety risks. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal charges, raises significant concerns about their suitability to possess a shotgun. The responsible person's duty is to act with due diligence and uphold the spirit of firearms legislation, which prioritizes public safety over mere administrative compliance. Failure to adequately investigate or report such concerns could have severe consequences, including enabling a potentially dangerous individual to acquire a firearm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively and thoroughly investigating the applicant's suitability by contacting the police and inquiring about any domestic incidents, regardless of whether formal charges were laid. This approach aligns with the core principles of the Firearms Act 1968, as amended, and associated Home Office guidance, which emphasize the need for a comprehensive assessment of an applicant's character and propensity for violence. The licensing authority has a statutory duty to be satisfied that an applicant is a fit and proper person to hold a shotgun certificate. This includes considering any information that might suggest they pose a risk to themselves or others. Reporting concerns to the police is a critical step in this assessment process, ensuring that all relevant information is considered before a decision is made. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to investigate further and proceeding with the application based solely on the absence of criminal convictions is professionally unacceptable. This approach neglects the broader requirement to assess suitability and ignores the potential risks highlighted by the domestic disputes. It represents a failure to exercise due diligence and could contravene the spirit of the Firearms Act 1968 by overlooking relevant information that might indicate the applicant is not a fit and proper person. Contacting the applicant directly to ask for their explanation without first consulting the police is also professionally unsound. While obtaining the applicant's perspective is important, it should not be the sole or primary method of investigation, especially when there are existing concerns. This approach risks the applicant downplaying or fabricating information and bypasses the established channels for obtaining crucial intelligence from law enforcement, which is vital for a comprehensive risk assessment. Simply noting the domestic disputes in the file without any further action or consultation with the police is insufficient. This passive approach fails to meet the licensing authority's obligation to actively assess suitability. It amounts to a procedural oversight that could lead to a flawed decision, potentially compromising public safety by not thoroughly exploring the implications of the reported incidents. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearms licensing must adopt a proactive and risk-based approach. When concerns arise, such as reports of domestic disputes, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the potential risk. 2. Consulting relevant authorities, e.g., police, for further information. 3. Obtaining and evaluating all available evidence. 4. Making a decision based on a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability, always prioritizing public safety. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, justifiable, and compliant with legislative requirements. Question 14. Benchmark analysis indicates that a firearms licensing officer in England is reviewing an application for a shotgun certificate from an individual who has no criminal convictions, but has recently experienced a period of significant personal stress due to family illness. The applicant states they wish to obtain the certificate for recreational clay pigeon shooting. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Refuse the shotgun certificate solely on the grounds of the applicant's recent personal stress, as this could be interpreted as a potential risk to public safety. Option B. Grant the shotgun certificate but impose a condition that the applicant must only shoot under direct supervision at all times, without further investigation into their individual circumstances. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability, including verifying their stated reason for possession, confirming secure storage arrangements, and considering whether the recent personal stress could impact their judgment or responsibility in handling firearms, while also noting the absence of criminal convictions. Option D. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the applicant has no criminal convictions and has provided a lawful reason for possession. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability, including verifying their stated reason for possession, confirming secure storage arrangements, and considering whether the recent personal stress could impact their judgment or responsibility in handling firearms, while also noting the absence of criminal convictions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms licensing and the potential for public safety risks. A firearms licensing officer must balance the applicant's right to possess firearms with the statutory duty to ensure public safety. The officer's judgment requires careful consideration of all available information, including the applicant's history, the nature of the proposed use, and any potential concerns raised. The decision-making process must be objective, evidence-based, and strictly adhere to the Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's suitability, focusing on the specific requirements of the shotgun certificate. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, confirming the lawful reason for possessing a shotgun, e.g., sport shooting, pest control, and crucially, assessing whether the applicant poses a risk to public safety. This involves considering any relevant criminal history, mental health concerns, or evidence of irresponsible behavior with firearms. The officer must also ensure the applicant has secure storage arrangements in place. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the statutory requirements of the Firearms Act 1968, which mandates that a certificate shall not be granted if the applicant is a person who poses a danger to the public or whose possession of a shotgun would be a danger to public safety. It prioritizes a comprehensive, risk-based evaluation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to grant the certificate solely based on the applicant's assurance that they will be responsible and have no prior convictions, without independently verifying storage arrangements or exploring the specific details of their proposed use. This fails to meet the statutory duty to ensure public safety, as it relies on unsubstantiated assurances rather than concrete evidence of suitability and secure storage. The Firearms Act 1968 requires more than just a lack of negative history. It demands positive confirmation of suitability and safety. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse the certificate immediately upon learning the applicant has a history of minor, nonviolent public order offenses, without a nuanced assessment of whether these offenses are relevant to firearms possession or pose a current risk. While past behavior is relevant, A blanket refusal without considering the nature, recency, and context of the offenses would be an arbitrary decision and could be challenged as unreasonable. The assessment must be proportionate and consider the specific circumstances. A further incorrect approach would be to grant the certificate without confirming the applicant has a genuine and lawful reason for possessing a shotgun. The Firearms Act 1968 specifies that a certificate is for the purpose of possessing a shotgun for specific lawful reasons. Granting it without this verification would undermine the regulatory framework designed to control the possession of firearms for legitimate purposes only. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding the statutory framework, Firearms Act 1968, and relevant Home Office guidance. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment, considering all aspects of the applicant's suitability and proposed use. 3. Seeking and verifying information from multiple sources where necessary. 4. Making a decision that is objective, fair, and demonstrably in the public interest, with clear justification for the outcome. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a firearms licensing officer in Scotland is reviewing an application for a shotgun certificate, SGC. The applicant has no prior criminal convictions. However, the officer has received information from a neighbor detailing a recent, heated domestic dispute involving the applicant, and the applicant's employer has noted increased anger and frustration from the applicant in recent weeks. The officer must decide how to proceed with the application. Which of the following approaches represents the most appropriate professional conduct in this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough investigation, seeking further information from the applicant, their referees, and potentially the police, to assess the applicant's suitability and any potential risk to public safety before making a decision on the SGC application. Option B. Impose a condition on the shotgun certificate requiring the applicant to attend anger management classes before the certificate can be issued. Option C. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the applicant has no criminal convictions, and the reported incidents are not criminal matters. Option D. Refuse the shotgun certificate outright due to the reported domestic dispute, as this indicates a potential for violence. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough investigation, seeking further information from the applicant, their referees, and potentially the police to assess the applicant's suitability and any potential risk to public safety before making a decision on the SGC application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms licensing and the potential for public safety risks. A firearms licensing officer must balance the applicant's right to possess firearms with the statutory duty to ensure public safety. The officer's judgment requires a thorough understanding of the Firearms Act 1968, specifically concerning the suitability of an applicant and the conditions that may be imposed on a shotgun certificate, SGC. The challenge lies in assessing whether the applicant's personal circumstances, including their mental state and any history of domestic disputes, pose a risk that would render them unfit to hold a certificate, even if no criminal charges have been brought. The officer must act impartially and objectively, relying on evidence and statutory requirements rather than assumptions or personal feelings. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of all available information, including the applicant's application form, references, and any reports from relevant agencies, such as the police or mental health services. The officer must then apply the criteria set out in the Firearms Act 1968, particularly Section 27, which deals with the refusal of a shotgun certificate. This includes assessing whether the applicant is a person who poses a risk to public safety if granted a certificate. In this case, the reported domestic dispute, even without a conviction, and the applicant's expressed anger and frustration, warrant further investigation and careful consideration of their suitability. The officer should seek additional information, potentially including an interview with the applicant and their referees, and consult with the police regarding any relevant intelligence. The decision to grant, refuse, or impose conditions must be based on a reasoned assessment of the risk to public safety, documented thoroughly. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to grant the shotgun certificate without further investigation, solely based on the applicant having no criminal convictions. This fails to acknowledge that the Firearms Act 1968 requires an assessment of suitability beyond the absence of criminal convictions. The reported domestic dispute and the applicant's agitated state are relevant factors that could indicate a risk to public safety, and ignoring them is a regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach would be to automatically refuse the shotgun certificate based on the reported domestic dispute, without conducting a thorough investigation or giving the applicant an opportunity to respond. While domestic disputes are serious, a refusal must be based on a clear assessment that the applicant is a person who poses a risk. A blanket refusal without due process is an ethical and regulatory failure. A further incorrect approach would be to impose overly restrictive conditions on the shotgun certificate without sufficient justification, such as requiring the shotgun to be stored at a police station. While conditions can be imposed to mitigate risk, they must be proportionate and directly related to the identified risks. Imposing such a severe condition without a clear and present danger being established would be an arbitrary and unjustified action. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearms licensing must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves understanding the statutory framework, gathering all relevant information, objectively assessing risks, and making decisions that prioritize public safety while respecting the rights of applicants. When faced with ambiguous or concerning information, the professional course of action is to seek clarification and further evidence, rather than making assumptions or proceeding without due diligence. The decision-making process should be transparent, well-documented, and defensible against statutory requirements. Question 16. The control framework reveals that a resident of Surrey has applied for a shotgun certificate (SGC) and has disclosed a history of depression which was treated 5 years ago. The applicant states they are now feeling well and have no current issues. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to take? Option A. Request a report from the applicant's general practitioner (GP) to assess their current mental health and any potential risks, and then review this report before making a decision. Option B. Rely solely on the applicant's statement that they are feeling well and issue the certificate without further investigation. Option C. Inform the applicant that due to their past mental health diagnosis, they are automatically disqualified from holding a shotgun certificate. Option D. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately as the applicant states they are feeling well and have no current issues. The correct answer is A. Request a report from the applicant's general practitioner (GP) to assess their current mental health and any potential risks, and then review this report before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearm ownership and the legal obligations surrounding it. The applicant's history of mental health issues, even if seemingly resolved, requires careful consideration under the UK's shotgun licensing framework. The core challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to possess a shotgun certificate with the paramount public safety duty imposed on the licensing authority. A failure to adequately assess risk could have severe consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented assessment of the applicant's current mental state and any potential risks. This includes obtaining a GP's report, as mandated by the Home Office guidance, which specifically addresses mental health considerations for firearm and shotgun certificate applications. The licensing authority must then critically evaluate this report, alongside any other relevant information, to determine if the applicant poses a risk to themselves or others. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal requirements and guidance set out in the Firearms Act 1968 and associated Home Office guidance, which places a strong emphasis on public safety and requires robust evidence to be considered before granting a certificate. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the applicant's mental health history as irrelevant simply because the applicant states they are feeling better. This fails to acknowledge the legal requirement for a thorough assessment of risk, regardless of the applicant's self-assessment. The law requires objective evidence and a formal evaluation, not just an applicant's assurance. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the certificate immediately based on the applicant's assurances without seeking any independent medical verification. This bypasses the crucial step of obtaining a GP's report, which is a fundamental part of the due diligence process designed to protect public safety. It demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and a disregard for regulatory requirements. A further incorrect approach would be to refuse the certificate solely based on the past mental health diagnosis, without considering the current situation or obtaining a current medical assessment. While past history is relevant, the decision must be based on a current assessment of risk. A blanket refusal without up-to-date medical evidence could be challenged as unreasonable. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant legal and regulatory requirements, Firearms Act 1968 Home Office Guidance. 2. Gathering all necessary information, including applicant statements, police intelligence, and crucially medical reports. 3. Critically evaluating the gathered information to assess any potential risk to public safety. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process thoroughly. 5. Making a decision that is justifiable, proportionate, and in line with legal obligations and ethical duties. Question 17. In the United Kingdom, following a report of several domestic disputes involving an applicant for a shotgun certificate, SGC, in Surrey, which approach would be most appropriate for the licensing authority to adopt when considering the application? Option A. Defer the decision entirely to the local police force, accepting their recommendation without independent assessment. Option B. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature of the domestic disputes, liaising with the police and assessing the applicant's overall suitability based on all available information before making a decision. Option C. Automatically refuse the shotgun certificate application due to the reported domestic disputes, regardless of further investigation. Option D. Grant the shotgun certificate as requested, assuming the disputes were minor as stated by the applicant and did not result in criminal charges. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature of the domestic disputes, liaising with the police and assessing the applicant's overall suitability based on all available information before making a decision. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a firearms owner's rights and public safety, requiring a nuanced understanding of the Firearms Act 1968 and associated Home Office guidance. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal convictions, raises significant concerns about their suitability to possess firearms, particularly a shotgun. The licensing authority must balance the applicant's stated need for the shotgun with their duty to protect the public. Careful judgment is required to assess the risk posed by the applicant. The best approach involves a thorough investigation into the applicant's background, specifically focusing on the reported domestic incidents. This includes contacting the police to ascertain the nature and severity of these disputes, and potentially seeking further information from individuals involved if deemed necessary and appropriate under data protection laws. The licensing authority must then objectively assess whether these incidents, even without a conviction, demonstrate a propensity for violence or a lack of judgment that would make the applicant a risk to themselves or others if granted a shotgun certificate. This aligns with the requirements of the Firearms Act 1968, which mandates that a certificate shall not be granted if the applicant is a person who is prohibited from possessing a firearm, or if the grant would be a danger to the life or to the safety of the applicant or any other person. The Home Office guidance on shotgun certificates further emphasizes the importance of considering all relevant information, including past behavior, when assessing suitability. An incorrect approach would be to grant the certificate solely based on the applicant's assertion that the disputes were minor and did not lead to charges. This fails to acknowledge the licensing authority's duty to proactively investigate potential risks and relies too heavily on the applicant's self-serving account. It disregards the spirit of the Firearms Act 1968, which places the onus on the applicant to demonstrate suitability and on the authority to ensure public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to automatically refuse the application solely because of the reported domestic incidents, without a thorough investigation. While the incidents are a red flag, a blanket refusal without due diligence may be seen as arbitrary and could be challenged. The licensing authority must conduct a fair and impartial assessment, considering all available evidence. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to defer the decision entirely to the police without conducting an independent assessment. While police intelligence is crucial, the licensing authority retains the ultimate responsibility for granting or refusing a certificate and must make its own informed decision based on all gathered information. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making framework. First, identify the core issue, suitability for a shotgun certificate given past behavior. Second, gather all relevant information, including official records and applicant statements. Third, Objectively assess the gathered information against the legal requirements and guidance, considering potential risks. Fourth, make a reasoned decision, documenting the justification thoroughly. Finally, communicate the decision clearly to the applicant, outlining the reasons for refusal if applicable, and informing them of their right to appeal. Question 18. Investigation of an application for a shotgun certificate in Surrey reveals the applicant, Mr. Arthur Pendleton, has provided a letter from the Clay Pigeon Shooting Association confirming his membership, which he states is his sole reason for requiring the certificate. However, a police intelligence report notes a minor public order offense committed by Mr. Pendleton 5 years ago, for which he received a caution. The FLO is aware that Mr. Pendleton has no other known criminal convictions. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firearms licensing officer? Option A. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the applicant has provided a letter from a recognized shooting organization, and the offense is old and resulted only in a caution. Option B. Grant the shotgun certificate but impose a condition that Mr. Pendleton can only shoot at designated Clay Pigeon grounds and must be accompanied by a licensed instructor at all times. Option C. Refuse the shotgun certificate solely on the grounds of the past caution, as any history of public order offenses indicates unsuitability to possess firearms. Option D. Verify the authenticity of the Clay Pigeon Shooting Association membership and conduct a background check to assess if the past caution has any bearing on Mr. Pendleton's current suitability to hold a shotgun certificate before making a decision. The correct answer is D. Verify the authenticity of the Clay Pigeon Shooting Association membership and conduct a background check to assess if the past caution has any bearing on Mr. Pendleton's current suitability to hold a shotgun certificate before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the firearms licensing officer, FLO, to balance the applicant's stated need for a shotgun certificate, SGC, with potential public safety concerns arising from their past behavior. The FLO must meticulously assess the information provided, considering both the applicant's current circumstances and any relevant historical context, to make a lawful and responsible decision. The challenge lies in interpreting the good reason requirement and the suitability provisions of the Firearms Act 1968 without succumbing to personal bias or overlooking critical details. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, evidence-based assessment that directly addresses the statutory requirements for an SGC. This means verifying the applicant's stated good reason for possessing a shotgun, such as membership in a recognized shooting organization or gamekeeping. Crucially, it also necessitates a comprehensive review of the applicant's background, including any past incidents that might call into question their suitability to possess a firearm, as per Section 27 of the Firearms Act 1968. This approach prioritizes lawful compliance and public safety by systematically evaluating all relevant factors before reaching a decision. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the SGC solely based on the applicant's assertion of good reason, without independent verification or consideration of their past. This fails to meet the statutory duty to ensure the applicant has a legitimate purpose and is a fit and proper person. Bypasses crucial checks mandated by the Firearms Act 1968, potentially endangering the public. Another incorrect approach is to refuse the SGC based on the past incident without a current, direct link to the applicant's suitability to possess a shotgun. While past behavior is relevant, the decision must be based on whether that behavior, or other factors, currently makes the applicant a risk. A blanket refusal without current evidence of unsuitability is unlawful. A further incorrect approach is to grant the SGC, but impose arbitrary conditions not related to the lawful use of a shotgun, such as restricting the applicant's general movements. Conditions must be directly linked to the safe and lawful possession and use of the firearm, as permitted by firearms legislation. This approach oversteps the legal authority of the FLO. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with understanding the specific legal framework, Firearms Act 1968 in this case, and its requirements for SGCs. They must then gather all necessary information, including application details, references, and background checks. Each piece of information must be evaluated against the legal criteria, particularly the good reason and suitability provisions. where there is ambiguity or potential risk. Further investigation is warranted. The decision must be justifiable, documented, and based on objective evidence, not speculation or personal opinion. Question 19. Assessment of an application for a shotgun certificate in the United Kingdom reveals that the applicant has a history of domestic disputes with a former partner, although no criminal charges were ever brought. The applicant states they require the shotgun for legitimate pest control activities on their rural property. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing officer? Option A. Automatically refuse the application due to the mention of domestic disputes, as this indicates a potential for violence. Option B. Grant the shotgun certificate immediately, as the absence of a criminal conviction means the applicant is automatically suitable. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, reviewing any available police records, and assessing if the information indicates a current risk to public safety or the applicant's suitability before making a decision. Option D. Focus solely on the applicant's stated need for pest control and disregard the information about past domestic disputes. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and circumstances of the domestic disputes, reviewing any available police records, and assessing if the information indicates a current risk to public safety or the applicant's suitability before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the applicant's stated need for a shotgun with the legal requirements for obtaining a shotgun certificate, SGC, in the United Kingdom. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in a conviction, raises concerns about their suitability to possess firearms. Law enforcement officers responsible for SGC applications must exercise careful judgment to ensure public safety without unfairly penalizing individuals. The key challenge lies in assessing the risk posed by the applicant's past behavior against the absence of formal criminal sanctions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding the domestic disputes. This includes contacting the applicant's ex-partner, if possible and appropriate, and any other relevant parties, as well as reviewing any police records or incident reports. The officer must then objectively assess whether the information gathered indicates a propensity for violence or a lack of control that would make the applicant a risk to themselves or others if granted an SGC. If the investigation reveals no credible evidence of ongoing risk or a pattern of behavior that would disqualify them under the Firearms Act 1968, as amended, the application should proceed based on the applicant's stated legitimate reason for needing the shotgun. This approach adheres to the principles of due process and the legal framework governing SGC applications, which requires a refusal only if specific disqualifying factors are present. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to automatically refuse the application solely based on the mention of domestic disputes without conducting a thorough investigation. This fails to adhere to the legal requirement to assess actual risk and could lead to an unlawful refusal. Firearms Act 1968 requires a refusal only if the applicant is considered a danger to the public or to themselves, or if they have been convicted of certain offenses. A mere allegation or past dispute without further evidence of risk is not a statutory ground for refusal. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the SGC without any further inquiry, assuming that the absence of a conviction means the applicant is automatically suitable. This would be professionally negligent and a failure to uphold the public safety aspect of the SGC licensing process. The licensing authority has a duty to make reasonable inquiries to satisfy themselves that the applicant is a fit and proper person to possess a shotgun. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the applicant's stated reason for needing the shotgun, e.g., pest control, and disregard the information about domestic disputes entirely. While the reason for needing the shotgun is relevant, it does not negate the licensing authority's responsibility to investigate any information that might indicate unsuitability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. Firstly, they must understand the legal framework governing SGC applications in the UK, specifically the Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance. Secondly, they must gather all relevant information, including the applicant's stated reason and any concerns raised. Thirdly, they must conduct proportionate and thorough investigations to assess the credibility and implications of any concerns. Fourthly, they must make an objective assessment of risk based on the evidence, considering whether the applicant meets any of the statutory grounds for refusal. Finally, they must document their decision-making process and the reasons for their conclusion, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a firearms licensing officer in the United Kingdom to meticulously assess an applicant's suitability for a shotgun certificate SGC. Mr. Arthur Pendleton is applying for an SGC and declares he owns 3 shotguns with barrel lengths of 120 cm, 115 cm, and 110 cm respectively. He claims to possess a single shotgun cabinet with an internal length of 130 cm, which he states is sufficient for all 3 firearms. He also has a minor discrepancy in his declared past firearm ownership history. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing officer, considering the Firearms Act 1968 and the Firearms Rules 1998? Option A. Require Mr. Pendleton to provide detailed specifications of his shotgun cabinet, including its internal width and any internal divisions, and to demonstrate how all 3 shotguns can be securely stored within it, while also investigating the discrepancy in his past firearm ownership. Option B. Advise Mr. Pendleton that his current cabinet is insufficient due to the total length of the firearms exceeding the cabinet's internal length, and suggest he purchase a larger cabinet without investigating the past ownership discrepancy. Option C. Approve the shotgun certificate application immediately, assuming Mr. Pendleton's statement about his cabinet's sufficiency is accurate, given the total length of the firearms is less than the cabinet's stated internal length. Option D. Reject the shotgun certificate application solely based on the discrepancy in Mr. Pendleton's past firearm ownership history, without further investigation. The correct answer is A. Require Mr. Pendleton to provide detailed specifications of his shotgun cabinet, including its internal width and any internal divisions, and to demonstrate how all 3 shotguns can be securely stored within it, while also investigating the discrepancy in his past firearm ownership. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms licensing officer in the United Kingdom. The core difficulty lies in accurately assessing the applicant's suitability for a shotgun certificate SGC when faced with incomplete information regarding past firearm ownership and a potential gap in declared storage. The officer must balance the public safety imperative with the applicant's right to possess firearms, adhering strictly to the Firearms Act 1968 and associated guidance. The mathematical element introduces a layer of complexity, requiring precise calculation to determine if the applicant meets the minimum storage requirements, thereby testing the officer's attention to detail and adherence to regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous, evidence-based approach that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This means verifying all information provided by the applicant, cross-referencing it with existing records, and ensuring that the proposed storage arrangements demonstrably meet the stringent requirements of the Firearms Act 1968. Specifically, the officer must confirm that the applicant possesses a secure, locked cabinet capable of storing the specified firearms, and that this cabinet meets the minimum security standards. In this case, the calculation of the total length of the proposed firearms is crucial. If the applicant proposes to store 3 shotguns with lengths of 120 cm, 115 cm, and 110 cm, the total length is /120 plus 115 plus 110 equals 345 cm. The Firearms Rules 1998 stipulate that a standard shotgun cabinet typically has internal dimensions that can accommodate a total length of firearms up to a certain limit, often around 120-130 cm for a single firearm, and the capacity for multiple firearms is assessed based on their combined length and the cabinet's internal configuration. A cabinet designed for 3 shotguns would need to accommodate this total length. If the applicant's proposed cabinet has an internal length of 130 cm, it is insufficient for the proposed firearms. The officer must then require the applicant to demonstrate possession of a cabinet that can securely store all 3 shotguns, considering their combined length and the cabinet's design, or reject the application based on inadequate storage. The officer must also investigate the discrepancy in past firearm ownership to ensure no undisclosed risks exist. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to approve the application based solely on the applicant's assertion of owning a suitable cabinet, without verifying its specifications or the total length of the firearms. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for demonstrating secure storage and introduces a significant public safety risk. The Firearms Act 1968 places the onus on the applicant to prove they can safely store firearms, and a cursory acceptance of their word is a dereliction of duty. Another incorrect approach would be to reject the application outright due to the discrepancy in past firearm ownership, without first attempting to clarify or investigate the matter. While caution is warranted, a complete denial without due diligence may be procedurally unfair and could be challenged. The officer has a duty to investigate discrepancies reasonably. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the mathematical calculation of the total firearm length, without considering the practicalities of storage within a cabinet. While the calculation is important, the ultimate goal is secure storage. A cabinet might have sufficient internal length but lack the width or internal divisions to safely and securely house multiple firearms, especially if they are of varying lengths and designs. The officer must ensure the cabinet is appropriate for the number and type of firearms proposed. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearms licensing must adopt a systematic and thorough decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the applicant's request and the specific firearms involved. 2. Identifying all relevant legal requirements and guidance, particularly concerning storage and suitability. 3. Gathering all necessary information, including verifying past ownership and assessing proposed storage. 4. Performing any required calculations or assessments, e.g., storage capacity. 5. Evaluating the gathered information against the legal framework. 6. Making a decision based on evidence and regulatory compliance, prioritizing public safety. 7. Documenting the entire process and the rationale for the decision.